Thank you for viewing my presentation today. My name is Dr. Linda Mahony and I'm a Senior Lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast. My presentation today is about improving the lives of children and families in the aftermath of divorce. First, I'm going to give you a brief background to the phenomenon, have a look at the ecological perspective, the research questions, method, results, conclusion, and finish with implications for children and families and practitioners. Separation and divorce have become a common phenomenon across the world and affects a substantial proportion of children. While some children readily adjust to their parents' separation and divorce, other children exhibit difficulty adjusting emotionally, socially, and demonstrate poorer academic outcomes when compared with children with married parents. The impact of parental separation and divorce can affect children over an extended period, continuing into adolescence and adulthood. Separation and divorce in Australia have consequences beyond the family, and those consequences may involve teachers. This presentation addresses this gap in the literature by examining the perspectives of separated and divorced parents of what living well means for them and their family in the context of their separation and divorce, and the role of early childhood services in schools and teachers in assisting them to realise these aspirations. An ecological perspective provides a backcloth to the study to understand the social influences on children and families experiencing parental separation and divorce. Relevant to this study is the influence teachers and families can have on children. Teachers may be able to serve the children in their care and their families if they understand them better. In this current study, parents were viewed as partners in education. Teachers, schools and early childhood services endeavour to hold up the aspirations families have for their children and their family and readily support children and families as needed. However, teachers, schools and early childhood services need to be confident that their practices enable all children and families to flourish regardless of their family circumstance. In some instances, these practices may need adjusting to suit the needs of children and families experiencing parental separation and divorce. First, teachers, schools and early childhood services need to develop an understanding of what children and families experiencing parental separation and divorce need and want, so that they can work with them in ways that support them to promote well-being and learning. The aim of this study was to understand the perspectives of separated and divorced parents of what living well means for them and their family in the context of their separation and divorce, and the role of early childhood services in schools in assisting them to realise these aspirations. The research questions guiding this presentation are: what are parents' aspirations for the children and themselves to live well in the aftermath of separation and divorce? And what practices of teachers, schools and early childhood services enable and constrain families' ability to live well during the process of separation and divorce and into the future? Data for this project came from an interview study with 12 parents who discussed their perceptions of the communication and collaboration with their children's teachers, school and early childhood service during the process of their separation and divorce. Data were analysed using thematic analysis to identify themes to understand parents' aspirations for their children and themselves, and to identify those practices that enabled and constrained them to improve their lives in the aftermath of separation and divorce. It was important to first identify what parents' aspirations were for their children and themselves to live well in the aftermath of separation and divorce. Separated and divorced parents talked holistically with a particular focus on emotional and social well-being of the children and themselves. Lucinda talked about flourishing and thriving, not surviving. Parents were overwhelmingly concerned with their children being happy. Mia sums it up: the biggest thing is to me, my children doing well and they're happy. That's the biggest thing. That's actually the biggest thing. Nothing else matters after that, really. For parents experiencing separation, divorce, flourishing and thriving meant feeling safe, happy, supported, being respected and accepted, and being socially connected. Once the themes of emotional and social well-being were identified as parents' priority for the children and themselves, the interview transcripts were re-examined to identify those practices of teachers, early childhood services and schools that enabled and constrained them from realising these aspirations to live well during the process of separation and divorce and into the future. Parents reported that the structure of school and early childhood services, communication between parents and school or early childhood service, positive relationships, and the role of teachers, schools, and early childhood services in reducing the stigma and normalising separation and divorce contributed to them realising their aspirations for their children and themselves. The institution of school or early childhood service and the relationships that these sites enabled contributed to children feeling safe, happy and supported. At times when family life was undergoing change, early childhood services and schools provided that stability with their predictable routines and arrangements. Schools and early childhood services are predictable sites that bring together children of similar ages and their parents. The predictability of routines and arrangements of schools and the relationships made at schools provided support for their children during the process of separation and divorce. While their home life was changing at this time, they could feel safe and secure and confident in that the school arrangement would stay the same. However, there were some constraints. While the overarching institution of school was supportive and there was some flexibility with the practices of schools for working with children and families experiencing parental separation and divorce, not all practices were conducive to promoting a sense of safety, happiness and support. Lucinda challenged the school's traditional policy and practice around homework. Another parent found misalignment between what was documented in these prospectuses and their experiences of the day-to-day practice. Annalise talked about not having their emails answered. Parents talked about the affordances for parents to network with each other at school and early childhood sites. Lucinda said, I think the school has to be there on some levels. They have to be there as a support network. Schools and early childhood sites could provide an informal space for parents with similar experiences to talk and support each other. This parent considered school and early childhood sites to be the hub of the community. Parents' experiences with communication and collaboration with their children's teachers and schools and early childhood services differed greatly. While some parents were satisfied that the children's teachers were attuned to their needs and made a point of regularly checking in with their child, other parents said that teachers could be more proactive with communication, and in their experience that communication only happened when something went wrong. They went on to explain that they had separated and divorced when the child was in preschool. He was now in year 5, and Ava said that she had never been asked. She'd never had an email to say, I'm just checking in. Is everything okay? Is there anything happening at home that the teacher should be aware of? Positive relationships were imperative to build and maintain communication and collaboration between parents, children and teachers, schools and early childhood services. Many parents commented on the positive relationships teachers had built with children and their parents. When parents communicated with teachers, they reported that their child's teacher had responded really well, saying that she would make a point of regularly checking in with her daughter to make sure she was okay, and made sure that she can talk to her teacher if she needs to. It seemed that there were personal qualities of teachers that enabled the building of positive relationships. Parents described the personal qualities of empathy, understanding, respect that enable children's feelings of being safe, happy and supported. Getting the balance with the right amount and type of communication between parents and teachers can be challenging for teachers, as every family circumstance is different. Parents said that teachers understanding the family context was important for them to be able to provide the support that they needed. Teachers' understanding and having empathy for family circumstance was supportive for parents. Parents talked about the fine balance of knowing just enough about family circumstances to enable teachers to provide support without overstepping the professional boundary. However, this was not always the case, and Annalise talked about an incident where the teacher had indeed stepped over that professional boundary. Parents experiencing separation and divorce overwhelmingly talked about reducing the stigma associated with being separated and divorced. Celine wanted teachers to understand about family situation and not pass judgment. Celine talked about how her child's father was not involved in their life and the persistence of the school to communicate with both parents. She commented that having to continually explain her family situation was kind of a reshaming for me, suggesting that she had failed because her relationship with her child's father had failed. She said just by the asking of those questions, let alone having the O's and the raised eyebrows, I felt like I was being judged. For parents, the stigma that they felt from being separated and divorced posed a barrier to them realising their aspiration of social and emotional well-being for themselves and their children. Reducing the stigma associated with parental separation and divorce requires normalising the phenomenon rather than considering children and families that are separated and divorced as the minority. Olivia reflected and said, "One of the things that's helped my daughter is her best friend in the classroom also comes from, well, her parents are separated. This is something that may help her adjust by knowing that she's not the only child in the class." She went on to say, even if parents aren't living together, you're still a family and that sort of thing, because separation is so common these days. Olivia pointed out that diverse family forms were in fact the norm in the modern day and that separated and divorced families were no longer the minority. Children and parents have unique experiences in the home with separation and divorce. While I have attempted to arrive at common themes, it is not to discount the lived experiences of those parents who do not share these experiences. What is common between all the parents in this study, however, is the desire for their children and themselves to be safe, happy, supported, respected and accepted, and socially connected so that they can live their best lives. The experiences of the parents in this current study are invaluable to glean those practices of teachers, schools and early childhood services, and other professionals who work with young children, and those practices that enable them to live well during the process of separation and divorce, and what that nexus between home and family, school, early childhood service might look like to facilitate living well. Parents, like teachers, were primarily focused on promoting wellbeing and learning of children. The findings presented in this study have implications for teachers, schools and early childhood services and other professionals to inform them of the communication and collaboration in the nexus between home and school or early childhood service, and how teachers, schools, early childhood services and other professionals can value add to children and families to help them live well during the process of separation and divorce. This study exemplified the need for enhancement of school and early childhood service culture and policy that focuses on families experiencing parental separation and divorce. Parents in this study wholeheartedly agreed that schools and early childhood services have an important role in facilitating parents to realise their aspirations for themselves and their family. To do this, policy needs to encourage and support partnerships between families, teachers, school and early childhood service that facilitates open communication and collaboration, mutual respect and support.